In 1984, there was a major CEO change at the Disney company. Michael Eisner took over the company at a time when change was needed. Disney was losing lots of money due to the new Epcot Center and a string of flopped movies. By 1983, Disney had had 3 consecutive years of declining earnings, and something had to change. Michael Eisner's solution was to make Disney World a multi-day vacation destination. He did this by adding brand new theme parks, water parks, and new resort hotels. He knew that he had to expand the resort's offerings even further. So not only did Disney open deluxe resorts, they also opened the first of what is now called a moderate resort. This new tier system is based on the price of the hotel per night. The first moderate resort was Caribbean Beach in 1988. This was followed by Port Orleans French Quarter in 1991 and Port Orleans Riverside in 1992. The moderate resorts proved to be very successful and allowed families looking for a cheaper vacation to come to Disney World. It also allowed families to come more than once. With this business plan in mind, Disney opened its first value resort in 1994. All-Star Sports and All-Star Music competed with the surrounding cheap Good Neighbor hotels around Disney World. Disney's venture into the budget hotel sector was successful and again popular with families looking to take a vacation but can't afford to stay in a deluxe resort, something that we need today. The next budget resort, All-Star Movies, opened in 1999. These resorts were disastrous to the competition around Disney World, since many of them could not compete with the theming, even though, let's be honest, the All-Star Resorts theme are not the best, and price. This is where the story gets interesting. Because of that lack of great theming, Disney decided to create a resort themed around different decades of time. The resort would be in 2 different sections, divided by the Generation Gap Bridge and Hourglass Lake. Each half would have its own check-in building, gift shop, and food court. The section on the left of Hourglass Lake would be themed to the thousands, 10s, 20s, 30s, and 40s. The legendary years' icon statues around the resort would be a Tonka trunk in the 40s building. In the 30s courtyard, there would be a Monopoly board. According to Passporter's Walt Disney World book, there would be a Coke bottle pool for the 1920s and a crossword puzzle pool for the 1900s. Across the lake, the 1950s buildings would have a jukebox statue, and the pool would be shaped like a bowling pin. The 1960s would have a Play-Doh statue, and the 1970s would have a Big Wheel statue. The 80s would have a Roger Rabbit statue, and the 90s would have a statue and pool that looked like a computer. Each half would have 10 buildings and 2,800 rooms, meaning that both Pop Century buildings would be bigger than the All-Star Resorts combined. Construction on Pop Century Legendary and Classic years began in 1999. The first phase of the resort was scheduled to open in December 2001. First phase included the Classic Years building, with the Legendary Years opening sometime after that. Construction was going well and it looked like the Classic Years would open in December. Classic and Legendary halls were completed. These would house the food courts and the check-in areas. By March 2001, some Classic Years buildings were getting painted and having signage installed, like this building in the construction photo. That is a 50s building. By April 2001, even more Classic Years buildings were being constructed and painted. By August 2001, even more progress had been made at the resort. Meanwhile, over at the Legendary Years section, not much is happening since this is the first phase of construction for that half. The check-in building and 2-room buildings are structurally completed but gutted on the inside. Lots of land were cleared for the other buildings, and construction would ramp up sometime closer to the Classic Years section opening.
This just in, you are looking at obviously a very disturbing live shot there. That is the World Trade Center, and we have unconfirmed reports this morning that a plane has crashed into one of the towers.
Another plane just hit. Right, oh my gosh, another plane has just hit another building.
We're looking at a live picture from Washington, and there is smoke pouring out of the Pentagon. It would appear that there has been another major explosion.
Investigators are still sifting through a crater in Pennsylvania tonight. That's all that's left of United Airlines Flight 93, a flight believed to have been hijacked as part of the terrorist plot.
On the morning of September 11th, terrorists hijacked 4 airplanes and attacked the United States. On that day, Disney World closed out of abundance of caution for the safety of guests.
Unforeseen circumstances, the Magic Kingdom is now closing.
This day had a massive effect on life in the United States, and tourism was affected the most. The fear of another attack was high for the U.S. citizens, and most did not want to leave home. Disney's stock dropped 38.2%, and in its Q4 earnings, they reported a 68% decrease from the period last year. Disney also reported a loss of $158 million for fiscal 2001. Disney had to cut 4,000 jobs and prices because of the economic struggles. Pop Century also had to be delayed until 2002 when they could afford to resume construction.
Until that day came, a nearly completed resort just sat there waiting to be completed. The construction wouldn't continue until a year later, and the opening date was delayed once more. Disney didn't resume construction on the Legendary Years section yet. These buildings still sat abandoned, and it looked like it would be a very long time till these buildings got completed.
On April 22, 2003, Pop Century started accepting reservations for the Classic Years rooms. Construction was finally complete, and Pop Century, the Classic Years, opened on December 14, 2003.
The Legendary Years were slated to open in 2007, but it still wasn't even close to being done with construction. All indicators pointed to the Legendary Years being completed since Pop Century was called the Classic Years, and there were references to the Legendary Years going to be present on the other side.
Some guests became very curious to what the buildings across the lake were. The abandoned buildings were very visible from Pop Century, and some guests ventured over to that section to see it for themselves.
Legendary Hall and 2 of the 40s buildings sat abandoned for years, and no information came out from Disney on if or when they would open the resort. Legendary Hall was the most complete, with having the large year letters and windows being placed on the buildings. The shell of the 40s buildings were nowhere near complete, but they did have doors that had been placed and painted.
In 2005, Disney renovated some all-star music rooms and turned them into family suites. Rumors quickly began saying if these were successful, the Legendary Years could finally open as an all-suites resort. These were just rumors and were untrue, as All-Star Music Family Suites opened and were successful in 2006, but Legendary Years did not open.
2007, the year Legendary Years was supposed to open, came and went, and still no resort. At Pop Century, rumors were flying around what would happen to those buildings, but none were true.
The Legendary Years parking lot has been used a few times for overflow parking for ESPN Wide World of Sports. Man, Disney is really good at not trying to hide these abandoned buildings. They practically invited people to even explore it and gave no updates on what was going to happen to it. Sound familiar?
The foundations and buildings of Legendary Years Resort were sat abandoned for almost 10 years. Until Disney finally announced a new resort in 2010. The Legendary Hall and 40s buildings were no longer going to be part of Pop Century. Instead, they would be a new resort called Art of Animation. This resort would be a mix between value rooms and family suites. The resort would also have sections themed to different Disney movies. These movies included The Lion King, Cars, Finding Nemo, and The Little Mermaid. The 40s Legendary Years rooms would become Little Mermaid rooms, and Legendary Hall would become Animation Hall.
Construction finally resumed in summer 2010, and the giant year lettering was removed from Animation Hall. I tried to find what happened to these, but I couldn't find anything, so they were probably just scrapped.
Some interesting remnants of Legendary Years can be found around Pop Century today. First are the buildings themselves, because they didn't tear anything down. So the 2 room buildings closest to the lakes are the ones that are abandoned, and for the foundation for a couple of the other Little Mermaid rooms. The others, like this, are original to Legendary Years. You can actually see the difference of the buildings on aerial shots on Google Maps. Also, the Pop Century check-in building is still called Classic Hall. Generation Gap Bridge is still there too, of course. So the next time you walk across this bridge, imagine you were going to the Legendary Years Resort instead of Art of Animation.
Hey, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I wanted to give a quick shout out to my friends over at the No New Friends podcast. Please join Chris, Mary, Scott, and Sarah as they venture into the world of adulting, and also hear from their legendary cast of characters. I've been on this show myself a few times and am a loyal listener, so please give this podcast a listen. That's the No New Friends podcast, where no topic is off limit. I'll leave a link in the description to nonewfriendspodcast.com. But I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, let me know by leaving a like and consider subscribing. It would make me a very happy man. And if you have ever stayed in the Little Mermaid rooms, please let me know what that's like down in the comments below. And with that, I will see you all in the next one. Have a magical day, everybody.